That is always the ultimate unanswerable question. If you die, that's the point. You might as well face it now. If you die, people can say anything they want to about you and you're done for. Well, yeah, if you were so smart, why did he die? Now you can't say a word in your defense. Good evening. Welcome to the news. Be sure and stay tuned. Later we will be continuing our summer Olympic coverage, and we'll be returning to the weightlifting competition. And tonight, I think, will be of particular interest. We'll be giving special coverage to the heavyweight division and specifically the Jamaican team, who's expected, as always, to walk away with the gold in their specialty, the fish and jerk. And as always, on Thursday, the news is being brought to you courtesy of the good folks at Tuber World out on Highway 58, right next to Boone's Corners Crossing, where they say tubers are our business and damn near our only business. So be sure and go out and see those good folks if you're short a spud. And since it's June, if you have friends that are going to take that big matrimonial plunge, be sure and get them listed in Tuber World's bridal registry. Now the news. One man had 2 wives. One man had 2 masters. One man had 2 homes. One man had 2 jobs. Everyone has 2 of something. A situation that a few find destructive. Sitting on his back steps, a boy mused, how come that sometimes things seem simple and at other times seem complex? And why can even the same thing at one time seem simple, then later complex? And after mulling on this self-proposed question for a bit, he looked down at his dog laying in the yard and said to him, how come you think that is, Bosco? And as a lesson in nonverbal approaches to problems, Bosco was tempted to jump up and run over and bite the lad with no warning, but withheld the action, remembering that he had not had his most recent due rabies shots. A man once asked himself, what would it be like to be conscious but unable to speak? Not merely mute, but lacking a language. More than a few people unknowingly speak of liberation and enlightenment throughout their lives, while having no awareness or interest in same. It seems as though, just like the rest of us, life daydreams. The speaker so spoke, you live life physically, but think you do mentally. And a voice in the crowd called out, so? The point being, a man went to the doctor about a complaint, and after a brief examination, the physician said, your problem is obvious. And the man said, strange, that's what the obvious said to my problem about me. One day, one man said to himself, the most destructive aspect of knowing that men before me have gotten free is that I want to compare myself to them. And now back to the big prize game. Okay, contestants, here's the final big question. To a man of greater awareness, what is even worse than the destructive? Oh, what's that you say? Contestant number 4. You say, the annoying? Hey, we have ourselves a winner here. Throughout his being, one day a man cried out, if I don't start living now, I'm a dead man. I mean now, damn it, this and every other very instant. The question was asked, does talking about it always make it more complicated than it is? Yes, he replied, and was further asked, does it have to be this way? And yes, he answered for a long time. On one world, the creature's intelligence can be measured on a tripartite scale, with those at the far dumbest end having little regard for intelligence, then those in the middle having much respect therefor, and then those at the extreme advanced end seeing through the whole facade. A man once went to study with a wise teacher, and before long became even wiser than the one teaching. But only he realized it, not the teacher. How curious things progress within the confines of an enclosed space. Hint: if in your personal dictionary the term enclosed space is not accompanied by a picture of the human mind, your reference library is still in its nascent stage. And the much anticipated concluding speaker at the conference banquet had these concluding words to his speech. And we as professionals all know that perhaps the most dangerous psychological activity of them all is talking to oneself. And from the audience a voice asked, "You are referring to thinking." "What else?" he replied. "Are we or are we not professionals?" Many of the waiters cleaning off the tables did not understand these remarks. But then again, they are not trained professionals in the field. They're simply people. Two facts for your morning cereal. Fact: one man lived a charmed life. Fact: there is no such thing as a charmed life. Fact: how would you know? That's three facts. So sue me. Or have toast. As he reached across the table, a father said in the son's direction, "Do you realize that at the molecular level, every day is Sunday?" And as always, the lad was pleased that the source of his existence would take the time to notice him by way of a word play on his position in the family structure. And while men ordinarily show no signs of recognizing such, life continually does the same thing for them by way of allowing them to live yet another minute. And a boy asked his father, just what was the purpose of the inclusion of that last line about life's awareness of us individually? And the elder made derisively scoffing noises as he jellied his toast. And as they strung him up by his thoughts, he screamed in a dramatically theatrical voice, "I am not a grain product. I am a man." Yeah, that's what they all say under torture. When one man heard a song entitled, "It's Raining in My Heart," he thought, how curious. That's not at all where the rust is in me. And a boy asked his father, what was the definition of satire before it became a homing signal for morons? And a well-turned-out gentleman asked his local expert, do you by chance have even the slightest idea what's going on here? And he replied, if I did, would I still be here? Words either blind you or direct you. And even when they direct you, if you look at them more than a couple of times, they'll still blind you. Definition time. Thought-based enlightenment, or if you prefer, intellectual enlightenment. The tossing of a rope to a drowning man while he's being hanged. Once men graduate from athletic activities, what they would then enjoy most would be to read aloud the words of other apparently insightful men. Is this listed as scheduled in our TV guide, Homer? Not yet, dear. Not quite yet. Don't you just love it? How, when certain things have not yet reached fruition, life will make men, in reference thereto, use the words, not quite yet, implying that it's close, that it certainly only a matter of time. Did you say something, dear? When a boy would ask his dad, "What is progress?" And he would reply, "It is spelled M-A-N." Then when he matured and he asked the old man, "What is progress?" the elder replied, "Can you spell I-L-L-U-S-I-O-N?" But it was well into his 5th decade before the younger fully grasped the reply. A man called up the telephone company and said, "I want to complain. Nothing comes over my phone but words, and I'm sick of it." And the operator, as she had been instructed, immediately turned in the man's name to life for appropriate punishment. Okay, contestants, it's time for our bonus round. Answer this question correctly and receive the fine prize that Madeline is posing with and pointing to now. Listen carefully and be exact in your response, for I must take the first answer I hear from you. Here's the question. True or false? The greatest pitfall in attempting to achieve enlightenment is in believing that there is some way to go about it. Okay, the clock's running. One day, one man's body and mind were chatting, and the mind said, problems. What delicious little creatures. Problems are just made to be solved, or at least worked on. And his body replied, what are problems? And the mind pretended to feel sorry for the body for being so backward and unsophisticated. Okay. And the mind felt sorry for the body for being so backward and etc. That make you feel better, Mr. Mind? One man had 2 soccer balls that he'd kick around his backyard. One of them did okay, but the other one would kick him back. A father once noted to a son, if you're not attentive and present at this very instant, you're not alive at this very instant. And to himself the boy said, how could it be otherwise? One man named his boat the continual re-examination of the obvious. According to myth, Adam's first son, now forgotten, was his favorite, who he named, speak up, damn it, speak up. Somewhat clouding the innate beauty and message of this tale is an addition by some which claims that Adam only did this in a crude attempt to make up with God after that certain unpleasantness that passed between them. When he was at home, one man was more like himself than when he was not. Corollary, Larry. If you're not at home for sufficiently extended, continual periods, you'll never know who you are. One singer entitled his latest song, I've lived my life with a stranger. And did I note that he lives alone? A boy one day asked his dad, I've heard it said that men are actually strangers to themselves. Can this be so? Not only can it be so, replied his father, but irrelevant as well. Ha! Explained the lad, that same old combination, once again. Just like ham and eggs, said the old man. Just like ham and anything else you want to put with it. And once again, the boy was delighted to be aware of how the plate of life is big enough to hold anything you put on it, including thoughts. Just as he was about to expire, he heard a voice say, don't be so hasty. Then just as he was about to get real stupid, he heard a voice say, don't be so hasty. And then as he was going to try and be other than he was, he heard a voice say, don't be so hasty. So, given the seriousness and redundancy of the situation, he went to a well-known psychic and asked if he had any puddings to recommend. Some years later, when he was quite old, his grandfather said to him, can you believe that there are still humans in this day and age who have actual faith in words. And while the elder was guffawing, slapping his thigh and choking, the man immediately donned an expression of complete agreement and bewilderment so as to hide the truth about himself from the old man. One man privately named his efforts, "Thoughts are a knife," and continually reminded himself not to cut himself. A boy said to his father, "Let's play a game. You ask me a question and I'll answer it." "All right," said the dad, "try this. Is it possible to be more conscious while talking?" But the lad was too smart to fall into that one, what? I said, what? It is not correct to say that mind is everything, or that effort is everything, or that awareness is everything. There is nothing that is everything. A man asked a stranger, "How come familiar faces don't know anything of value?" "You've been talking to yourself too much again," he replied. A man went to the grand quiz master and asked him, "Do you have the 2 separate books of all the questions and all the answers?" And the grand one nodded that yes, he did. And the man then said, "May I take a look at them?" And the grand one nodded, "No, you can't," because the last person who did realized that both books were the same. After he died, the molecular cosmos asked one man what he'd like to come back as. And he asked if anyone knew the April future prices of pink grapefruit. One man finally abandoned a wise man with whom he had been studying, concluding that if he was really wise, he wouldn't waste his time with the likes of me. And yes, he too had been talking to himself too much. There was once a man who had a hair-trigger temper. He got it a crew cut to slow it down. Then later he entered an organization devoted to the expanding of awareness and ended up with a hair trigger or something or other all over again. Ah, sighed a grandfatherly type to a tyke. I can remember the extremely ancient and good old circus days when religion would shoot people out of cannons and their desire for understanding would catch them and throw them back. And after a darn nice pause of silence, the lad asked, "Then what would happen?" "How you reckon they determine exactly just what is a grandfatherly type?" "Wow," breathed the tyke. "Wow." Within a mere split second after he died, one man exclaimed, "Ha! And I had every little detail up to now planned." And death turned the page on the man, and he suddenly realized that he had spent his entire life with the wrong hairstyle. The latest theory on how to eradicate civilization is to ignore it. This from the same man who had the same theory last year regarding words. And coming from behind the barn, a voice cried out, "Brutus, Brutus, why dost thou betray me?" And another voice replied, "I believe you mean Judas, not Brutus. Plus, betrayal should be in the past tense, not the present." And the barn added, "When it comes to the power of words in the mind, you two done stepped in too much of it." And neither of the voices had the guts to ask, "Stepped in too much of what?" A man stopped the conductor as he passed by and said, "Exactly where is this train going?" And the official leaned over real close, patted the man comfortingly on the shoulder, and said, "Silly boy." And then there was that day in May that I told you about, when one man got life on the phone and said, "I guess this is your idea of a joke." And life replied, "Don't kid yourself. You've never even been close to seeing what I'd call a joke." And with that, the man attempted to tear up his train tickets, but the damn things wouldn't tear. When you know the origins of things, you have no problem with things. Even though we have named these videotapings New Intelligence, those of you who've watched it should know, and I'll tell you anyway, it is not really about what men would call ordinary intelligence, which would be based on thinking. I was going to pull out something that I've done in one way before, of taking events, ordinary, continuing kinds of events, historically and contemporaneously, that are accepted by humanity in general, by so-called intelligent, mainstream people. And in the past, I have simply attempted to get you to see that the way they look at it is not in any way explanatory, and that they will push it no further. I would like to encourage you tonight to see, and I'll try to explain it a little bit differently, that it is not simply a matter of stupidity, it is not a matter of any sort of willful act, it is not a matter of fear, but normally people would consider that the comment for me to say, well, here's something that goes on continually, and by God, people are not seeing it, and you would expect what I'm saying, no matter what the words are, an ordinary mind would expect this to be a criticism, and that what it would hear is I would say, here's the way that men ordinarily see this and this occurrence, but they do not see it correctly. The mind would hear correctly no matter what I said. Even if I said the ordinary people do not see it comprehensively. They do not see it exemplary. They do not see it expositionally. But the mind would still hear it as direct criticism. They would simply hear that I was saying people do not see it correctly. It is not a matter of correct or incorrect, but it is a matter of an impossibility. It is a matter, tonight, what I was going to present as the basis for this, it is a matter that the mind cannot think about itself, that the mind will never see the kinds of things that I can point out are the kinds of things that if you can reach a state of consciousness that is in fact beyond, outside the confines of intelligence, new or otherwise. Of course, I should point out, of us picking the name New Intelligence infers not just a different way of looking at something, but a whole new way, and not based on thought. That it would really be more apropos, when I get into it verbally this way, if we called it new consciousness, new awareness. But at any rate, well, not at any rate. I mean, I do have my standards, so it's not at any rate, but at a decent rate. But we'll leave it at that. Not including, of course, federal and state taxes, but at a decent rate. Well, there's several easy examples everyone's heard, rather than try to come up with a historical precedent. They're there. But let me just take the kinds of things that are going on in our day and time. The late 20th century, by intelligent people, by what are considered to be intelligent people, by what are actually considered to be more than just routinely intelligent people, because I was about to quote the kinds of people who make headlines, who garner public attention as writers, speakers, that there is this taken as an insightful commentary on human existence, particularly in the civilized, educated world. In fact, the more so that you're in that area of life's ongoing mass mechanical parade of change and so-called evolution, the more such things have currency, the more such observations seem to have, on the surface, to the people involved, seem to have some explanatory currency. It's such things as this. The conversation, or somebody write a whole book on this. It doesn't have to be an accidental conversation, but somebody can write a whole book, let's say on the media. Let me just get it started. And denouncing the media on the basis of this, of the damage they have done in general, in that the media is so powerful today that whatever that the leading media, the media with the largest, like the world's largest cities, largest newspapers, the largest television, satellite news networks, or the ordinary networks, that they have an unacceptable power over the human mind. And let us say that the book, and the author making comments on it, he does not attack human intelligence. He is simply pointing out that the media is so powerful that human minds being bombarded constantly by some story, and that whatever, as they would call it, whatever take, whatever spin the media puts on a story, that no matter who you are, that if you are a right-thinking citizen, an intelligent person, sophisticated, of course you keep up with the news. And so you are constantly being hit over and over and over by what are basically the same sorts of takes that they point out, that no matter whether it's a conspiracy or not, that it just ends up that major stories end up being reported more or less in the same way. And whether it be through imitation or whatnot, but you end up with all the major news network, all the major news sources reporting on important world events in more or less the same way. And so whatever their take on it is, if they're putting the blame in some conflict in Congress or between nations somewhere, or if they're undertaking some apparent crusade having to do with the public morals, that if they keep on, and they end up, as the man would point out, generally with a common view of it, that there is a common report. After a few days, it is just almost the same view coming from all different newspapers, all different media, and that the human mind, and you listening to this, and you having no other recourse, that this is the only way this story is reported, that they have an unacceptable, to an intelligent person, once they know the facts, say he, an unacceptable, irresistible effect on the human minds who hear it. A variation of that continues to pop up, all the way from psychological to psychosomatic problems. We've been in the midst of so-called eating disorders, bulimia and anorexia. And the common take on it now by experts is that it comes out like this: it is society's unreal picture of the female form that drives women to such pathological activities. That's a pretty nice. We can go from that to just the media reporting a war. That gives you a wide spectrum. All right. I assume I've laid the groundwork. The media is being blamed, that is, information coming out, that the only information you have about a certain matter, let's say that it's the news media's report on a continuing battle over budget concerns in the Congress. And they blame it on the left wing or the right wing. It doesn't matter, the president as opposed to the legislative body. And it goes on and on and on and on and on and on. And they point out that if that's all you hear, and if the news media is continuing to report it is the president that is hindering reforms in the country's fiscal activity. It is he who's doing it. It's he who's doing it. He's who's doing it. That if you keep hearing that is the major report, that you will end up believing it, whether it be true or not, by God. All right. The media. And again, for the time being, discount the idea of a conspiracy. They just take it on the basis that that's what they report. It just happens. Then we have one, instead of a profession, we have, like all of us collectively are guilty. Well, in this case, picking out women, I don't know why. Sex has nothing to really do with this, other than sex has something to do with everything. That it would appear obviously to be men's fault again, not necessarily conspiratorially, and then some women are being unconsciously or acting as unconscious dupes, such as models will starve themselves, or girls that are real thin will decide, what'll I do for a living? And they find out there's no great demand since pipe smoking has decreased. They can't decide what to do for a living, and they decide to become models. No, we can't wait. So they decide to become models. And then you have all these men. I assume everybody got the other example I pulled out, is they say, here are women, young girls now, having absolutely unattainable, unreal pictures of themselves due to. Of course, here it falls back to the media again, but in this case, they're not blaming the media, they're blaming society. They're blaming all of us, especially men and then women indirectly who will not stand up and say a word about it, that here it is that we're continually bombarded in print and electronic media of these thin women. And that in some way in our society, has become the picture of beauty and therefore has set up unrealistic goals for just ordinary, intelligent, just ordinary young girls and women, and now has driven them to the point of death in some cases, but in absolute pathological behavior. In both cases, you can be as intelligent as anyone, go out on the street, go out amongst ordinary people and get a definition of intelligence and find people who fit that definition, and they would say that these descriptions are valid. Whether they're passionately supporters of either one, but if you describe this, they would say, well, there's certainly merit. And it's very likely, well, it's a certainty, if they heard either one of these having to do with the media or men's, let's go ahead and say men's, it doesn't matter, but society, primarily men's unrealistic picture of what the female form should be to be attractive. In both cases, you would have intelligent people would listen to it and say, at the very least, they would go, that's valid. And if they heard it several times, you went back and polled them again or asked them, they would say, well, as a matter of fact, I would say that the likelihood, more than 50% likelihood, is the prime factor. That is the prime factor in the first case of people having misleading ideas, faulty ideas as to what constitutes the political reality of our day and time because of the way it's reported. And in this other case, that women are making themselves psychologically and physically ill by trying to live up to some unreal notion of what beauty is as put forth crudely and coldly, calculatingly perhaps, by society. If they heard that 3 or 4 times, intelligent people would then, I'll just go ahead and say the odds are, they would then, even had they had no particular personal interest in it previously, if they'd been exposed to that for a handful of days, handful of times, and they really listened to it, they would become real supporters of it, which of course fits into the first complaint about the media. All right, so we've got, now I could keep coming up with them, but I will assume that you have got the basis from those 2 examples. In one case, we have the media. Repeating one more time, forget the idea that there is a conspiracy amongst some individuals. It's just the media. It is just the way that the news now on our small planet, it's the way that the news is so quick. The news now that the highest rated shows on television, I think, in many cases, are news programs. That news has become, according to so-called news junkies, that their accusation now is, it's become mere entertainment. It's not serious like it used to be. But at any rate, the news now is just part of the, without any negative connotation being to it, the news is now part of the human field of entertainment. At any rate, the news is everywhere. That if you live anywhere outside of a monastery, the news is all around you. You can't get away from the news if you wanted to, hardly. So it's pointed out that men individually intelligent men end up with faulty pictures of what's going on in the world, with incomplete pictures. That men, in some cases, voters, polling shows it, elections show it, that men will support causes, ideas in which they had no real interest because they were misled. That just the reporting over and over by the media with the same sort of twist, spin on it, will make people, the best intended of people, the most intelligent people, cannot resist this onslaught, this incessant onslaught of the media reporting things over and over and over in a common manner. It just, you end up thinking, well, it must be true. All right. That, the media's I mean, there it is. The media, there's no doubt about it. You hear it a few times. By God, if I say it again, I'm going to begin to believe it. Theatrics. Never seems to help, but at least nothing like a good slap in the head to give you a small sexual thrill. Well, never mind that. It's not the time to go into that. So there we have the media. And the whole scenario, the whole explanation, that let's take a step away from it just for a second and say that there's some serious polling going on now that there has been, since I brought out budget debates, something going on, let's say, in the Congress, between the President and the Congress, been going on for months. And it's constantly in the headlines. And it catches people's attention because it has to do eventually with taxes and et cetera, and money out of people's pocket. And it's reported over and over for months and months. And let's say, by and large, the press has laid the blame on Congress, and that the President's trying to do the right thing. And then after it's been going a few months, and perhaps it's sort of reached a standstill, nothing's happening, or maybe Congress is out for the summer. And some polling organization, some news organization, a news network, somebody needs a story for the day, and they go out and do some extensive polling with the general public. What do you think about what's been going on for the last 3 months up there in Washington, hanging with this budget debate and this argument? And they find out, according to their reports, the way they ask the questions, that a large, some 80%, over 80% of the people expressed a very strong opinion about what was going on, except they did not understand what was going on, obviously. And it can be proved by the way the question was formed. It wasn't a trick. The pollers were surprised. They were trying to just simply find out, do you support the president, blah, blah, blah. And the way the question was asked and the way the people answered it, the vast majority had a strong opinion, but it turned out if you ask them another question about what they expressed, it was obvious that they did not understand what was going on, but they answered it on the basis of what the media had been reporting. Now that can be serious. Say serious people. And so you could have a social commentator or a man with a book, as I said, that he whips out a book right quick, a reporter, somebody that's been involved with this, pointing out, in any good book like that, they can go on and on. All they got to do is rack their memory for the last few months if they work around politics, if it's a political book, and that constantly goes on. There's constantly, the media's reporting something and people think they hear. At any rate, it all fits. So you could look then, after this polling result comes out, and the man who had written the book saying that the media was having a destructive, not a constructive, influential effect on society, but it was having a destructive effect because it continually presented in a repetitive manner stories that always had, whether consciously or unconsciously, had a particular point of view. And that point of view seems to now be, again, unconsciously or willfully, to be a shared view by all of the world's or this country's leading media. And so therefore, the people end up very likely, very often, and not knowing it, being misled because they will just go along with it. That and then society. Making girls, why would girls? They ask girls, they go out and poll girls that are in hospitals, in sanitariums, suffering from eating disorders, serious ones, and ask them. And you know what's going to happen. They're going to, have you been looking at all these thin models all your life? Yeah. Did you ever pick up your father's Playboy sneaker and look at those girls with those little teeny waists? Uh-huh. Well, looking at you now, and I hear that when you were young, when you were 12, you weighed near 200 pounds. Yeah. I guess you were kind of embarrassed. Uh-huh. So I guess looking at that just made it worse. I mean, you just felt like, I bet your self-image just plummeted. Yeah, whatever plummeted is, it did. Again, it fits perfectly. It fits, except for this. Before I say except for this, none of that's incorrect. None of that's wrong. None of that's even relevant. The only reason I'm talking about it is oh, did I tell you that the Jamaican, the heavy lifter, the guy in the super heavyweight division, I tell you that his pulled groin muscle healed up nice, and we're expecting him to compete later this afternoon. If you don't know why, I'm talking about it. It's not to point out a flaw, but now you got to listen I'll try to bring this to a if you take intelligent people and you ask them to define, to describe, or even if you're just sharp enough, if you just observe the history of humanity, right up to this minute, what humans describe as thinking. And again, this is not a criticism, but if you can see it in a certain way, what people describe as thinking, they do not do by their own definition, not mine. There is a way in which, if you get even partially freed from it, you look at other people. I mean, by this time you yourself do not have to be reminded at all that it's not critical, but you can look at people. You can look in their face, you can look in their eyes. You can either do it or not. And it's not a trick you can learn, but you can look at people once you have a new experience as to what can happen inside the human brain, so-called human awareness, and people are not thinking. Or if you'd like it put a slightly different way for those of you who do not know what I'm saying, it's not going to mean a lot regardless of what I say. You can see that people are not going, how about this, out of their way to think. I figured I'd get a laugh, and it doesn't really tell you much unless you understand what I'm saying anyway again, and then all this is irrelevant or redundant. You can look at people, as intelligent as they may be experts. Let me try it this way, but you can look in their face, so to speak. And they ask an expert, well, how do you explain the fact that now the dangers are known over bulimia and anorexia? Famous celebrities dying over it. Doctor, how do you explain the fact that all of the figures, all the survey shows that it is on the increase? And you look in his face, he's written the leading book on it. He's done research. He's been working with it, young girls with these problems, for 30 years now. And you can look in his face, and he gives an answer. But if you look in there, I just got to tell you, there is no thinking going on. You either know what I'm saying or not, and even those of you who have no experience otherwise, can you even get a glimpse? You can't look at it critically and say the man's stupid. That's got nothing to do with it, because he has much experience, as they call it. He has much field research, statistics, and it's already in here. It's already in his playback mechanism, and they ask him maybe a very complicated question. The reporter trying, of course, to get as much time on camera as they can before they have to turn to him. So it's a long, complex question, but asking, how do you explain this? What do you say about this? And you look in his eyes, and the answer may be the current shibboleth of what is the cause of all eating disorders. It may be the standard answer for the day. It may be the accepted wisdom. It may be the accepted scientific truth of the day. And they finally get around to, so what do you think of it? And they stick the mic in his face, and the camera comes around, and Dr. So-and-so says, and if you look, he may look wise, he may look concerned. His words may represent the thinking of the day, but if you look in there, it might as well be, literally, that he has a machine, like a playback machine on a tape deck, and the question comes in at Misha, and he goes, that is a good question, and here is what I have found. And there is nothing resembling, by humanity's own definition and description, not mine. It's not a criticism. But he is not thinking. Now you can start playing with it and say, well, he doesn't have to think about that answer anymore because he spent 30 years coming up with the information in the background to know that. Neat, huh? Sure is neat the way that all this can work out, that no matter what you ask the mind that even resembles, even has the aroma of a criticism, forget it. Not only criticism, but inescapable criticism. That is, that you think, I have finally, help me Aristotle, I have finally got the mind cornered like a crazed, impotent rat I have taken its own information, its own words, and I have now cornered it, and it will never escape. Get real. Get a mind. The mind laughs at such. Ha! But anyway, back to what I was, do you understand that the mind, now I just did it for it. If I say the professor, the doctor, the leading expert in this subject, when they ask him a question, and he goes, Bernard, that's a darn good question. Now let me tell you what I have found after my 20 years. If you can look in a certain way, I say look, it's hear, feel, but you can, there is nothing resembling thought going on. The man is playing back something. And I don't mean he's sitting and rehearsed it. And it doesn't have to be a world expert. You can turn around to your husband or wife and say, do you still love me? Or, did you forget to buy milk? You can say, yes. Or, am I getting fat? Do I look as good with thin hair as I did when we first met? And if not, you think there is a God. So it doesn't have to be some exotic medical question. The point is, you can look in people's face. Of course, it's better when the question does seem to require, I was being a little silly to show you, but I just wanted you to understand it is not limited. I'm not picking on experts and saying that they don't know anything. Hell, nobody knows anything. I'm not picking on them. But there is nothing resembling thought. People are not pushing it. People are not going out of their way to think. There is no effort going on when you ask somebody. If there was ever anything resembling effort, it was a long time ago, and it was little incremental, little bits of pieces, and him saying, well, I don't really have to think about the answer because I have 30 years of work on it. As I said, that explains it. You can't corner the mind, but it also, it has a modicum of reality to it, to him to say, well, I don't have to actually stop and think about what I'm saying because I know it. And that fits. Of course, these are the same kinds of people, I might add, that I have sent out my questionnaire now for several years saying, I will agree that you're a world leading expert in, and I let them fill in the blank. If you'll answer me this one question, what are you going to say next? I have yet to receive one reply. Well, that wasn't in crayon. From a state home. As I've hit before, and as most of you should know, you do not know under ordinary conditions what you're going to say next, which is the same thing as saying you don't know what you're going to think next. And so it is not astounding, even my description, to say that people are not thinking. There's a chemical electrical activity, and if they're answering you, that's resulting in the movement of air making sound waves by the flapping of their tongue, that there is some kind of activity going on. You say, well, doctor, how do you explain that now women know the dangers of these eating disorders and it's still on the increase? How do you explain this? He is not thinking when he answers. People do not think. If they did, they wouldn't know what they're going to say next. They could answer the question. Anyway, that can't be proven because there's always that. At one time I thought, well, I have finally come up with the final rat-catching, rat-cornering question. Humanity has been slipping out of this for now 6,000, 7,000 years. I have finally come up with it, is I'll look it right in the eye and say, you rat, what are you going to say next? And that will make the rat go, my God, and turn into a princess. Doesn't matter with ordinary people. If it did matter, they would think, because they'd think, wait a minute, I don't think. And we'd have exploding rats everywhere. We'd be covered in rat parts. All right, people do not think. Now, back to those two questions of the media being able to mislead people, or people following it around blindly, whether they're attempting to mislead them willfully or not, but that minds being exposed to the repetition of news reports on one subject with a certain view of it, or just the subject itself. Then, the view is not the point, by the way. I'm hoping you people are not getting confused. If they just keep reporting a story with no view about the war in such and such area, a struggle between some rebels somewhere in some little country and the powers that be. If they keep on and on and on and on and on and on and on every day about that with no particular view of it, if you go out and interview people and ask them, what is one of the most important pressing problems in this planet? People go, oh, that conflict in such and such. It could be made up, but it could be just a little teeny country. It could be that the rebels amount to 12 guys and the powers that be amount to 17. But I'm just saying, if the news report it, this is the story. This is that which I was using as a platform. It then points out that minds, ordinary, intelligent, sophisticated minds, get drugged by the media, get drugged by reports. They're dragged along to where, if any story I can make up like that, if it's reported over and over and over, that minds will be dragged with it. We've got that, and there seems to be no doubt. There's no way to disprove that. There are a multitude of ways to prove it. Anybody with any intelligence can prove it. Those involved with it can prove it. Those against it can prove it. The same thing about eating disorders. Why in the world would somebody starve themselves? Why would somebody eat and throw up, and eat and throw up, or just starve themselves? Why would they do that? It's death-defying. It's death-inviting, I mean. Why would they do that? So then they point out, well, look, we have in our society, this particular one, we have an artificial view of what is a beautiful female form, and now it is having detrimental, nay, destructive effects now on hapless girls who are attempting to live up to this and cannot do it. It is our fault. I mean, society came up with this. We didn't have to do this. But you look at it, there is no way to disprove that. And a multitude, you can prove it from all kinds of directions. If nothing else, you go, all right, how else do you explain it? Which is, that's just before the rat goes to another corner and under its breath laughs at you for your question. If you keep trying to narrow it down and cut down on all of its responses logically, while the rat looking at you and picturing drawings it's seen of Aristotle and going, you two don't look a bit alike. But at any rate, and you think you finally got the rat cornered. And usually the cornering question is, all right, if what we say is not true, then how else do you explain it? I don't know why we're laughing at rats and the media and everybody else. You know, you're laughing at your own mind, because that's what I'm getting to. I used up enough time that I didn't have to play with the idea of proving this, which you know I couldn't anyway. Here it is. And I said that I had been trying to point out some of these examples of how things are, and that the mind cannot look and see. Humans will not look and see that their observations, their explanations do not explain anything. They're not even the best. They're not what they take as being the ultimate explanation. Doesn't even come close. That no explanation answers anything. Certainly doesn't answer it conclusively. So all of that, at first you would think, well, that just says that humans either are stupid or that humans are maybe not intelligent enough yet. But it's somewhere in there that it has something to do with the limitations of human intelligence, of the human mind. That if what I'm saying had any validity, if you could see that, yeah, you're right. But that's not the explanation. That gives you really nothing. That is not the way to make it useful to you because of this. And here's the tricky part. It's easy for me to say, but here's the part that the mind will never see. That is, that in all the examples, the two I use and every other one, they are not discussing, they're not talking about the media. They're not talking about society. They are talking about the mind. But it can't see it. It says the minds are dragged around by the media reports. The minds of these young girls are dragged around by this artificial, societal produced picture of beauty. So you look In both cases, you got what seems to be a problem over here. You've got minds being misled, the people being misled because of the media reports over here. There's the cause they propose. Now over here you've got girls suffering psychological, physical ill because of society's artificial pictures of beauty. It could have been anything else, you understand. But in both cases you've got a problem over here on this hand. Young girls getting sick, voters, society being misled. In the latter case, by the media over here, there's the problem. News reports, the media. And in the former, it's these girls being made ill by society's unreasonable pictures of what beauty should be. So you understand, you've got a problem over here that everybody recognizes, or they identify that here's a problem, can't deny it. One of them's physical, the other one seems to be, according to your view, even greater or lesser, but it has to do with the intelligence, the political awareness, the social views and attitudes of whole peoples, not just one sex, not just one segment of one sex. But over here you've got the media. How else can you say it? These people, we interview them, and they say, well, we think the greatest problem in the world is such and such. And it's people who have never, let's say it was that conflict, that one of the most dangerous things facing this country is that continuing conflict in the country of Azuzu. And you go, do you know where it is? No. Do you know what continent it's on? No, we don't. But you're sure that's the problem? Oh, yeah. And so you go, well, look at that. We are destroying the brains of a whole generation, but they don't even know where it is. And yet they go, well, it's important. And even if it's no big deal, you'd say, well, here's the proof of the fact that the media is destroying the minds, or the minds of people are too easily led and influenced by the media. And over here you've got girls starving themselves, killing themselves, and you go, how would anybody do that? And you interview them, they go, well, I want to look like, they name some supermodel, some movie star. And you go, that's why you do it? And they go, certainly. And so you look, well, how did this happen? Society. It just evolved, and here it is, society. You do know that explains nothing. Well, if you don't, I don't know why you're watching this video. That explains nothing. It's not that people are stupid, and it's not that the answer is wrong. The answer is not an answer. And here it is. And I'll end to see if you can see it. What appears over here to be a problem. Remember, the women with eating disorders and society, voters, the public, being too easily misled. In the case of the eating disorders, you have society's unrealistic picture of female beauty. In the misled voters and the public, you have the media. But you're looking in the wrong place, the absolute wrong direction. Because what they're discussing, what they're pointing out, and they will never know it, is they're not pointing out an eating disorder. They're talking about the human mind. When they talk about the human mind being easily misled, that seems on the surface to get a little bit closer, except it's always misled because of something. Faulty information or the media, and so you look away to see, well, what caused the mind to be misled? You're talking about the mind. See, that's the answer, but I know I got to finish it. To say, why is the mind being misled? What's the cause of it? See, if there was a chance of intelligence, then you would grab all of humanity and you'd slap their little faces. You'd go, listen to the question. What's the cause of our minds being misled? Sir, you're talking about the mind. Okay, but why is it being misled? No, you're talking about the mind. That's the answer to your question. Huh? It's as simple and direct as duck shit on a summer afternoon, but because of its inconsistency and its the inability to hold it in your hands without messing them up is why newspapers can charge more than holding a duck in your lap. But at least I have done my part for the quackers.